Welcome to Camera Shake Podcast, episode 44. And today we have not one, but two special guests on the show. Give it up for the leading lights of the pro photo world, educators, par excellence, and hosts of the hugely successful and wildly entertaining Photobomb Podcast. Give it up for Mr. Gary Hughes and Booray Perry, both in stereo here today. How are you guys? You good?
Did you say hugely successful, Booray?
I think he said hugely successful.
I'm more of like a, we're pretty okay. We do okay. Yeah, we do fine. You know,
well,
it's
compared
like
to them in the podcast world, we are hugely successful. I mean, they've like 44. They started last week with their podcast.
Yeah.
So you and I are like the old men, you know, the old veterans. We're like Johnny Carson, and they're like some guy doing an open mic night.
Camera Shake Podcast, officially the bad teenage mustache of podcasts. It's going to get there one day, but right now it's just
we're chugging along. You know,
thank you guys for having us.
Well, that's all right. We're only the best, man. We only have the best guests on this show. Clearly.
Of course. There's no question.
How good can it be? Most of your guests are from England.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, you know, really.
Well, I mean, you know, to be fair, actually, you know, we've had a lot of, I mean, especially recently, like maybe over the last, I don't know, maybe 2 months or something, we've had a lot of international guests on the show, which because of the time difference has like screwed our days over somewhat.
Right. So it's like still 2020 there, right?
It's pretty well. You know, you wouldn't know any different if you looked out the window because we're still in a complete national lockdown right now. So
yeah, well, we live in Florida, both Booray and I, and in two separate cities. He's in Tampa, I'm in Orlando. That's about a 2-hour drive on the motorway, as you guys say. Right. And you know, here our governor doesn't care if we live or die, so we're just allowed to do whatever we want. You know, it's pretty. I think we have more. Yeah, it's very, very liberating to know that if I want to go to a supermarket and contract a deadly novel virus, that I have the liberty to do so. God bless the USA.
But you guys, when the whole thing started, like last, March or April or something, you were kind of locked down as well back then, right?
Yeah, everybody would. Like the Queen gave a speech and stuff. Like everybody locked down for about 3 months or so, Boo, was it?
Yeah. What was funny was that we were much more stringent and locked down when it was much not as big a deal as it is now. It's much bigger deal now, but we're much more stringent now. I mean, we're much more like, whatever, because it's just been too long.
And I think when we locked down, there were like 100 deaths a day, and now there's still like 1,500 deaths.
I don't care. You know, I like if your friend, like if their finger catches on fire 3 days in a row, you're like, oh my God, we have to do something. And then if it happens for a year, their whole body could be catching on fire. And you're like, yeah, Bob's burning again, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's go. You don't, you know, after a while, you just get to where nothing phases you. And that's what's happened to us here.
Unfortunately, it's just become the background noise in the news cycle for a lot of us in the States. Now we have a very different way of government here. The states have a lot of control over certain things, and we have 50 states all with different laws and different ways of doing things. So you could go to New York City and they'll be locked down. Chicago, they'll be locked down. You come down here past the Mason-Dixon line in the South, and they're like, there's a pandemic? What's going on?
I made a huge comment right off the bat, and you guys just whiffed it and went right by the fact that I just basically grossly insulted the entire continent of the United Kingdom, and y'all just let it go.
Well, that's the thing that the British do is they're not confrontational people, but they rise up. No, they don't. They quietly tut at you for like when you cut a British person in a queue in a line, they don't ever say anything to you. They'll just go, and that's it. That's the biggest rise you'll get out of a British person. In America, they shoot you.
You get the shiv. Yeah. Oh yeah, you get shivved.
Shanked in the kidneys, shake from behind.
I also want to point out that I'm actually the only American citizen on the podcast right now.
That's true. Yeah. Don't hold it against me. I was born in Wolverhampton. That's where I hail from. Ooh. My family moved to the... Yeah, I see your face, Nick. I see your face. That's the reaction. But here's the thing about England. No matter where you're from in England, when you're in another place and tell someone where you're from, you get that same reaction. Nobody hates every other part of their own country like the English. Like if you'd be like, if you're in London and somebody goes, yeah, I'm down from Manchester, and they go... You know, or if you're in Manchester, you say, yeah, I just came up from London. They're like, you know, it's the same thing. So I could say I'm from London, Birmingham, anywhere you like, and I'd still get a tut and an eye roll from you. That's just how the English are.
Well, that is very true. I mean, I used to live in a place called Milton Keynes, which is sort of, which everybody makes, no matter where you're from in the UK, everybody makes fun of Milton Keynes because apparently we have concrete cows or something. I've never actually seen them.
And a roundabout every 100 yards.
Oh, yeah, roundabouts. That's right. Highest concentration of, roundabouts or circular traffic or whatever you call it.
And that's a thing worth hating an entire city over, is it? Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just want to,
no big deal. Fine.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are lots of there are funny things about this particular place. It's the only place in Britain where streets have literally no names but numbers. So it's like a H and a V system, very similar.
Sounds very efficient, very German. Sounds very good.
Which is, of course, why I lived there for such a long time. That's not bad.
So I have a theory about this because I've taught in London a couple of times at the SWPP conference, those great people over there. And I ask consistently in my courses where everyone thinks the worst place in England is. What is the worst place in England? Nick, what do you think the worst place in England is?
Oh, there are so many. I mean,
you see?
I gotta just quickly think, where do we not have any listeners already? So we'll just mention that place.
You see,
what do you got one, Nick? Huh?
Oh, I don't know. It's got to be, anywhere north of here.
It's exactly my point. Exactly my point. Although I have heard Hull a lot, that is consistently on the list of places that you don't want to hang out.
Well, the thing is, I grew up in a place called Slough, which is just around the corner from where I live now.
Sounds romantic.
And that has been consistently in the top 10 worst towns in England for decades.
Who makes that list, though? And why do they make that list? That's a really crappy thing to do, is make that list. It's so discouraging. It's not like the British national identity isn't, we made the bottom 10. All right, everybody, let's pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and let's improve. Let's get us off that list. They'll be like, screw everybody else. They don't know.
Exactly. It's a proud moment, to be in the bottom 10. It's voted for by the people from those towns. It's fantastic.
Well, clearly we always root for the underdogs. So, that's that's a claim to fame, I think.
Yeah.
If you make it to the top bottom.
So what can we do for you guys on the podcast today? What do you need from us? We're here to give you all of it. Like Booray and I will talk forever. So what do you got?
I think first on that list is going to be just some abuse. Is that all right?
Yes, I love abuse. Booray?
I think we've got that one out of the way already.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a few more jokes against the British, which I will also take to heart. I'll line up on the British side.
Cool.
I love the British. I've been to London. It was very enjoyable. I'm fascinated by Great Britain. I'm fascinated by the idea of Great Britain. So you don't realize that Americans think that Great Britain is two things. There's the city, there's London, which is like, New York, so it's this great, beautiful city and everything. And then if you move outside of London, everything is just fields and Thomas Kincaid painting cottages and small hamlets and village. Like you live in a village, right? There's like a stone wall in front of your house and stuff is growing on the roof and you're out walking your Shetland pony or something every day and you're going down to the pub to have a pint. That's what we think because that's what's been pushed to us. And I know that if I went there, it'd be like, oh, you live in some crappy apartment block in some terrible place, just like we have in America. You have horrible places just like we do. But on television, we've just been pushed that everybody lives in a quaint little village. So
and
nice.
we think that everyone sounds like Harry Potter because the British accent is so it's so held on a pedestal here. Like if someone walks into a room and starts talking with a British accent, everybody stops what they're doing. And
everything's better. Everything's better with a British accent. You're funnier with a British accent. You're more serious with a British accent. I don't care what it is. British accent brings home the goods in every single way. The only thing that's better with an American accent is rap music and country.
Or you clearly also a criminal mastermind with a British accent.
That's true. Sure. All the bad guys have to be British. Yeah, they really do. And it's really convincing.
Because that's how you know they're smart. Is that they sound British, right? Just try to watch Die Hard without, Snape playing the lead bad guy.
That was Hans Gruber, and I believe he was playing a German, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, but he still had the accent. He still
German
had that
accent.
European accent.
I would love it.
Oh, it's all European to us. We don't care.
See, I would love it if they dubbed like Hollywood movies with a British accent. That would be hilarious. Because they do that with some kids shows.
Oh, yeah. I've seen it different, like Paw Patrol. My kids watch Paw Patrol, and in England, they all have English accents, and in the States, they're all American. They use two different voice actors for Paw Patrol in different countries. Although anybody who thinks that the British accent is this, like, just universally beautiful and storied and intelligent sounding thing. There are places in England that you couldn't even recognize it as English that I've been to. You know what I mean? Obviously, you've never spent a lot of time in Birmingham. You've never spent a ton of time in the Black Country because you don't have any idea, if you're an American, that they have, like, if you were to say, Booray, question for you, what is the most, like, podunk, what area of the country has the most podunk, redneck, toothless, inbred? What part of the country would you be like, if you think someone's got a stupid, bad, terrible accent, where would they be from?
Tennessee.
Like the hills, though. Like
Tennessee, the hills of Tennessee, or Oklahoma.
The hollers of Kentucky, maybe?
Yeah, the hollers of Kentucky. Oh, yeah, the Kentucky hollers. There you go. Yeah, you can't understand. You don't know what the hell they're saying. You're speaking a language. It's not English. You don't know what that is.
Exactly. And England has just as many in like an area 1/18 the size of the United States. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's very true. I mean, that was totally confusing for me, when I first moved to the UK, because I really couldn't understand half of what people were saying to me.
I can't understand what you're saying now. I've just been nodding the whole time.
That's it. Booray, do you have any experience with film photography at all?
Well, yeah, because I'm quite old. So I started in film and had my own dark room, and was in in high school, worked in the high school dark room and the yearbook staff. And I know what deck tall smells like. I know D76. Right. I know Stop Bath and Fixer. That's right. I know all this stuff. But man, once digital came along, I didn't become a professional photographer until digital came along. So I did all that in high school and stuff. And then I got away from it for years. I was a disc jockey and a performer for years. And then in the 2000s, like 2007 was when I came back to it. And by then it was all digital. And thank God, because I never really considered being a professional photographer in the days of film, because it was just too much pressure. I still live in awe to the people who shot weddings on film and were just, I hope I got it.
Man, I hope I got it. Ultimate nightmare.
Yeah, I got 120 frames at this 6-hour wedding, and I hope I got it. I'll find out when it comes back from the lab. I can't. Oh man, that's just a tighter. I wouldn't poop for a week.
Did
you get the first kiss? I think so.
Maybe. I think so. Maybe. I don't know.
I hope so.
The funny thing is, my parents are both photographers. They're retired from photography now. My dad's just turning 80 in a couple of weeks, and I remember working in their studio as a kid, so I developed black and white headshots in the darkroom. I would use a small enlarger and made 8x10s, and my dad would tell me all these stories about the film days. Like when he first started shooting weddings back in the UK, and this would have been in the 1960s. He worked for a guy, and the way that they shot weddings back then was this guy had like 12 photographers working for him, and he would give everybody an assignment. You would go to the wedding, and there was no photography during the ceremony, and there was no reception photography. Essentially, what you would do is just the family formals. And so he would get a roll of like 10, 20, 30, however many images there were, just not that many images. And then you'd shoot the family formals. You'd run back to a dark room, give your film to a guy who worked for you. He'd make a contact sheet. Then you take that contact sheet to the reception, and then you'd sell prints to the guests at their tables. And that's how they made their money in the wedding photography business, like in the 60s. That's just wild to me.
Yeah. I used to talk to people who told me that they used to shoot 2-3 weddings a day, like one in the morning, one midday, and then one later on in the afternoon. Right. And it's really unthinkable today.
Well, there were no unlimited wedding coverage BS that they have today, because that is just insanity to me.
It wasn't a wedding. It was a portrait shoot on location. That's all it was.
It was a family portrait shoot where everybody's in a tux.
Yeah. It was a portrait shoot, and then also the cake cutting shoot. You go pose them, and do that shot. And that was about it. Maybe a couple other things. And that was it. We had a guy here locally. There's a restaurant here called the Columbia. It's a Cuban restaurant. It's been here for like 100 years, right? And there was a guy here locally, and a good friend of ours, Kevin Newsom, I actually worked for him and then eventually bought his studio. And his thing was at the Columbia that he would take pictures of people at their table. And then he had a darkroom set up in the back of the Columbia. He would take pictures at their table, go back in his darkroom, process, develop, print, and then go back and sell them to the people at their table.
Shots, baby. Makes money every time.
Before they finish dinner, he's got to process the negative and print the picture. That's crazy. Amazing.
Yeah, dude. I tell you what, when I was shooting weddings, the thing I made the most money on every single time were table shots. Just go around to every single table, photograph the couples, and then we get their email address. Then we would email all the guests, the gallery, and we put the table shots as the first part of the gallery. And we sold thousands in reproductions off of every wedding, all the way up until we stopped shooting weddings because we did this. And every single order had a table shot in it. And it was the stupidest thing. And they were big in the 80s and 90s. And then they really fell out of fashion. Photographers stopped doing table shots. And then we just started doing them and making money. And here's a funny story about Booray and I gave Booray that tip one time when I was in Tampa and I was speaking to his, I forget what was it, a convention or something. And I laid this out for you and I said, hey, and then the next time I saw you, you had given me like $100 gift card as a thank you.
Right. Right.
A Facebook gift card, which I don't know if they do that anymore. Do you remember if they do that?
Wow.
You're so
you can buy something from Facebook?
No, it's basically you buy the gift card through Facebook, and then they would let you just pick whichever one of their partner vendors you wanted to use it at. I forget.
All right, I totally forgot about that. I gave
You're
you
so
money
up on the
once.
technology, man.
I haven't seen those in a long time. Like
The
Facebook,
Facebook gift card. I don't know if they do them anymore.
Is Facebook still around? I'm not sure. It probably is.
Hey, absolutely. Although I would say that the equivalent now is Amazon gift card. It's funny about my mom, who is a photographer. She is so bad at technology that you can't send her a text hardly or an email, and everything is difficult. But every Christmas and birthday, I get like an eBay gift card. It's like, why do I have an eBay gift card? I don't understand. I've bought like 4 things on eBay in 20 years. Why would I have an eBay gift card? But I think it's just something through like a weird thing through her credit card company that she could just send those out. I'm not really sure, but yeah, it is. Those gift cards are mostly useless, and most of them don't get used.
I want to pick apart the settings because if you look at Nick is like some sort of a professional. Look at the lighting he's got behind him.
He's beautiful.
And he's beautiful. He looks like Nick. Like I want to date Nick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like Nick is cool. And then if you go over to Kersten, like he's got this, I don't know, Russian nesting dolls of lenses on the shelf behind him. I'm not sure what that's about. Do you use those lenses? Are they just decorations back there? What's that about?
Yeah.
Also, you're tilted. Also, your horizon is off. You're not going to score well in competition.
I tell you what,
because your horizon
I get that all the
tilted.
time. That's because my laptop is on a music stand, which still slightly.
Get your life together. A music stand's like
man.
20 quid. Just get your life together, man. You're a photographer. You don't shoot real estate, obviously.
Well, luckily, what you can see is that we're shooting ourselves with separate cameras. So what you see is not what's going to be in.
So this is just you give us the crappy one, and then
you get the low res. You get the low res.
Okay, understood.
See, they're doing that. They're doing that thing that we don't do. That making an effort.
Yep,
effort.
Yeah.
You're doing the effort thing.
Well, I tell you what is, obviously it's a sign of the times because at the moment you can see Nick is at his place, I'm in my place. Usually when we do this podcast, we're normally in the same place, so we're on the same set if you want. Which is sort of for us was the whole point of doing a podcast because initially we started out just talking to each other about photography stuff. Now being in the situation that we're in with lockdown and everything else, we just can't be in each other's houses.
Yeah, we've been doing that we did the driving because we're 2 hours apart. So literally probably for the first 100 episodes. Like I would say close to that. I would drive because Booray's like, if I have to put any effort into this show, I am not going to do it. So I did so I wanted to do it more than he did. And now I think it means as much to you or more than it does to me even because
yeah, it's nice that you think that.
I did. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. You just bury those feelings deep down inside. You're not going to see 60, my friend. And then I would drive the 2 hours and the 2 hours back, but we would record 4 episodes in one sitting. But even going like once a month, it was just like losing a whole day every single month. And then the editing in bulk like that. So we have been doing it remotely since about the last 186 episodes or something like that. And man, it's so much easier. And the best part is now we pay someone else to edit it. So neither of us have to put in that much effort, which is pretty fantastic. Like zero effort podcast. That's what I like about our show. Yeah,
I mean, we've been trying to kind of refine things ever since we started. Of course, we started in exactly the situation that we're in now, in the first national lockdown in the UK. And the reason why we started the podcast in the first place, as all of our 10 listeners will have heard many times by now, was the fact that we had, contracts canceled and everything else. And we were just literally, sitting at home going like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? Right. And so, and so we kind of thought, well, seeing that we spend, the lion's share of the day talking about photography anyway, we might as well start a podcast. There might be some other nerds out there who might even want to listen to that.
And now, question though, are you guys going to, because this sort of came out of the pandemic, right? The Camera Shake podcast. And so is it something that you want to continue with when you get busy shooting again, when things are loosened up?
I think definitely it's become part of the furniture now, I think after that 10-week point where we started to get into each, we were on the same set, I wouldn't look back. We love it. We absolutely love it. You know, and we were saying last week that, had COVID and all the crap that's going on out there, had that not happened, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. What episode number are you guys on now?
282. We'll film we'll record 288 on
somewhere in the two. Yeah,
288 on Monday. Yeah.
We were, for the longest time in the beginning. I think when I listen back sometimes to earlier episodes, it's
Wait, you listen to our podcast?
Yeah, because I wanted to ask that question. By the way, that was my other question. Nobody's addressed. Why are we on this podcast?
That's a really good question.
Right, I listened to your very first episode.
Oh my God!
Called Love and Hate, I believe.
Oh my God, that needs to come off.
That actually was our most listened to episode for a long time because people discover the podcast and immediately they go back to number 1 because they want to listen to them all the way through. Yeah. But for us, it's like they listen to 1, then 2, and then 3. They're like, I think I'll go back to what they're doing now. I think it's, it's quite a lot better.
I tell you what, I worked, when I first discovered you guys, it was, to me, listening to your podcast was really like a driving podcast for me because it was exactly the right length. And I used to spend all of, what was it, 2018 or something? Or where are we now? 2019. I shot a lot of boxing events. I shot a lot of like fights and whatever else. And so I used to like drive to these different places in the south of England. And so I'd be on the road for like, a couple of hours or something. And I would basically hammer through a couple of episodes because it would just, it would just fit. And so I worked backwards, and I think I got to, I can't even remember, but I probably got to like somewhere like 20, like episodes you'd made in like 2017, 2016, at which point the cameras that you were talking about were already so outdated that I kind of figured, okay, I might have to stop here. But we have the same experience because our first episode was called Done is Better Than Perfect. And because that was literally the thing for us. We'd been talking about the idea of podcasting for on and off, probably 6 months to a year or something beforehand. And it was one of these things, like, because life's busy, kids, family life's busy, work's busy. You kick the can down the road and it's just like an idea. And then COVID hits and you're like, okay, we got to do something to stay creative. We got to make stuff. We just got to do something to not go totally insane. I watched a thing on Creative Live. Yeah, that's right. So I discovered Gary's Creative Live course on...
Fat Gary. You saw Fat Gary.
Yeah, Fat Gary was great. Fat Gary was lovable.
I tell you what, though, man.
Do you miss Fat Gary, really? You miss him?
Sure. Fat Gary was a good guy. Fat Gary didn't make you feel insecure or old. Fat Gary was just a little roly-poly, teddy bear lumberjack,
Yeah, but that's true. And he's like, yes, he's younger than me, but he's fat, so he's not.
That's right. I'm like, he's younger than me, but he's obviously falling apart.
Yeah, but I started watching that, and you started talking about Star Wars, and I was in. That was it.
Is that it, huh? Okay.
100%. So
I think that may be where the whole Star Wars thing started, because like literally people send me stuff. Like I get Star Wars bobbleheads in the mail from people. Like, and I have no idea. Like my whole office is covered in Star Wars bobbleheads, and I haven't bought a single one. And it perpetuates itself because people come in and they go, "Oh, you really like Star Wars?" I was like, "Yeah, I saw it when I was like 9, and it was the best thing I've ever seen." And I mean, I watch the movies now because why wouldn't you? But like, I don't have a Star Wars tattoo, and I didn't name my kid Anakin or anything. Sorry if I don't know if anybody did that, but like, it's still something that I like. But for me, it's a movie, and I constantly look at people like blaming people for like ruining their childhood because they changed Star Wars, and I think, what if it was just a movie? What if it was just a movie and we could just enjoy it? And or not enjoy it. Like, it's fine. Don't worry. They'll make another one and then another one. And eventually there'll be one that you like, I promise. Like,
of course, Gary, you realize you don't have to put the bobbleheads up in the office, right?
Well, they're gifts. I got to display. I can't take them home. I'm not putting them in my house.
Some weeks back, and he wrote something like in his blog or something to say, like, to basically say, oh, he was on the podcast, and he enjoyed it, yada yada. And then he said, and the most amazing thing is, like, I spent 2 hours on the podcast and we didn't even mention f-stop once. So I kind of thought that's not a bad thing, because like, you can find out which f-stop to use to shoot wildlife just about anywhere else on the internet.
You don't.
Well, there's no doubt. There's no doubt that our podcast would not talk about photography at all if it wasn't that we needed a premise to exist.
Right. Yeah. That's
really the reason we really talk about photography. In the early days, yes, but now it's just we need a premise to exist, in the way that you watch a sports show, and sports is just the premise, and what they really want to do is just talk. That's us.
We can easily shift over and just be like a pop culture and movie podcast, and music or something. Like we would be just as happy doing that. The problem is like our audience is all photographers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, see, the thing, you're absolutely right there, because, if I think back how we started in the beginning, it being sort of, born out of the pandemic at the start, there was a definite element of Nick and me just needing to have somebody else to talk to, actually. And so it became almost like a therapeutic thing for us to do. And, and I've spoken about this many times on this podcast, is that it really gave us structure, because we record it on a Monday typically, and then we release the episode on the Thursday. And so, when you spend 3-4 months at home, every day, every week just feels like the same. Do you know what I mean? So you lose that kind of track. When you wake up in the morning, you go, I have no idea what day it is. And do you know what? I don't give a damn.
When we're going to record an episode, how far in advance do you think of what we're going to talk about?
15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I never know what's going to come out of my mouth. He says, welcome to the Photobomb Podcast. My name is Booray Perry, and with me as always is Gary Hughes. And then I have no idea what I'm going to say until right that second. And
right. No, when you say what we're going to talk about, I research like photography news to talk about.
Right. Yeah. The news
for 15
stories,
minutes,
I'll get it advanced.
I don't know what you and I are going to talk about. No. Although, like, if something funny happens to me, or I have a bit in the week that happens to me, I'm like, oh, that's a bit. Then I'll make a note, mention this during the podcast if you have time. I like to have something set aside to fall back on, like, oh, well, we need another 15 minutes of banter. Well, I've got this thing that happened with the dog this week that I can talk about. And that comes from my radio experience of everything was live. So you had to always know you had something in the bank that you could pull from if you needed it. And so I do that, but I don't spend a whole lot of time.
What we need are we need about 1 million listeners who are just really interested in hearing us talk about ourselves. That's
yes.
We rarely have guests.
We'd be huge.
Yeah. How about that? So if there are 1 million people out there and you want to hear two oddly insecure narcissists talk about themselves for about 55 minutes, I would encourage you to check out the Photobomb Photography Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and anywhere else podcasts are found.
How has it actually developed for you over the last sort of 4 or 5 years or so? So you started off like probably primarily talking about photography and whatnot, and probably a lot of preparation going into each episode, I'm sure, in the early days.
Yeah, we had more guests in the beginning too. We felt like the best thing to do was to bring on other people that would provide the content. But what we found was the podcast was birthed out of he and I just talking to each other and enjoying those conversations. And so at some point, and Booray really guided me into this, because I'm always the one that's like, we have to plan it. We have to come up with a thing. We have to have a gimmick. We have to have a whatever. And he's always like, let's make the show we want. And then whoever wants to listen to it will listen to it. And then I don't want to make a show that I don't want to make just because it'll be more popular. And so what we've really settled on is it's really like our weekly check-in with each other. And it's gotten more refined because we've just gotten better at being with each other and talking to each other. And Booray's got so much experience and he's so good. Most of it has just been me learning to stop talking when I can see on Booray's face that he's got something he wants to say, or like not stepping on his jokes. That was really hard at the beginning. He would set something up beautifully and I would just run right over top of it. And he's, you can see there's a bit of a sort of a long suffering on his face when he's basically gently guiding me into not being totally useless at this. And it's been, not only have I had a great time doing it, Booray and I have spent a lot of time together, I think we've developed a really good rapport and back and forth. But I've also gotten really, really good at talking and thinking on my feet and being on camera. And all of it is because of the hundreds and hundreds of hours we've spent recording with each other. And it's been a really cool skill set to develop, actually.
Were you editing a lot more in the early days? Obviously,
Less.
I know you were doing it yourself, but were you cutting more out?
We actually we threw out a few episodes. We've got at least 20 episodes that we recorded that never saw the light of day for one reason or another. But we actually edit more now, because the way we used to record was we would just both be plugged into a mixer, and that would just record one audio signal. And all I would do is basically put the bumper on the beginning and the end, and that's it. I didn't go in and do anything. Now I've got 2 separate audio tracks, and I'll go in and I'll edit it out when somebody clears their throat or they click their tongue against the roof of their mouth. If there's too long of a gap, I will cut it out and make it sound better. I will add time or take time away to make jokes land a little better. So it's like if Booray says something clever, but it takes him 2 seconds to get there, I put it almost right on top of what I just said, so he sounds great. Like, we do quite a lot more editing. And by we, I mean Daniel, our editor, does a lot more editing. But I think the results are better. I'm more particular about stuff like that, and we probably put more effort into the editing process than we should for a podcast with an audience our size.
But it's all news to me. But by the way, it's all news to me. I have no idea what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah,
I had
he's
no
never
idea
so much
that you
as seen a waveform of our podcast.
I had no idea that you were shortening up my jokes. Don't touch my jokes.
If you didn't notice, what's the difference?
Exactly. That's my point as well, is that he's telling me now that they do all this editing to the podcast, and I never noticed it.
Well, a lot of it is the delay from recording on Zoom. So there's like a half a second in real time where you're actually, when I'm talking to you, like the delay is in Zoom and not in your joke. And so I usually will take one of the things that is sometimes a start at the beginning. And Booray is usually, at least to me, about a half a second to a quarter of a second lagging. And so I will just tap his audio file over to the left so our lines up better. And that solves 90% of the timing issues, just cutting a quarter of a second out of his audio at the beginning and moving it to line it up.
I edit a podcast for a guy in Indiana as well. And that's just a pure audio podcast. So do exactly what you're just describing, those type of things, tidying it up, tightening it up, getting rid of the ums, the ahs, the coughs, the mouth slaps, all of that kind of stuff, right?
Once somebody points out the tongue click to you or the lip smacking, you can't unhear it.
You can't. You can never unhear it. It is the worst sound. It's horrible to hear that.
Just listen to this. This is what it sounds like. It's the tongue clicking against the roof of your mouth, because when you're listening and somebody asks you a question, your tongue peels itself off the roof of your mouth before you start to talk again. And that's that terrible sound. And I swear to God, I must have removed 1 million tongue clicks from our audio over the years.
It is painful to hear that. But the problem we have with doing this as a video podcast is that you can't remove a lot of that stuff.
No, because then it would just be very jumpy.
Cut in the video, and it will just look awful. So it's a bit of a nightmare with stuff like that. Have you ever considered doing your podcast as a video version?
We've done a few live things on our Facebook page, but Booray, that sounds like more effort, right? Like,
yes,
if you have to get dressed and do your hair to do the podcast,
no. There's a reason I was a disc jockey and not a television personality for 20 years, and it was because I could go to work, hungover with no sleep and sweatpants, and you couldn't tell. And I enjoyed that. I greatly enjoyed the total. No one knew what you looked like. No one could see you, and you could create and be whatever you wanted to be on the air. So I'm a big fan of it.
Love that. How long were you a DJ for?
20 years. I started when I was 17, and then retired when I was about 35, 37. I retired, became a stay-at-home dad. And then when the housing market in America crashed in 2007, my wife and I owned a successful title insurance company for when you get title insurance when you buy a home or refi. I say my wife and I. My wife had this company. She ran this big company. And it was we owned it. And I was a stay-at-home dad. I was retired, and I did the books for the company. And then we lost everything. When the market crashed, we lost everything in a month. We lost 12 employees and $1.5 million a year in sales. Were gone in a month, and we had to shutter. And it was, okay, you have to go back to work. And I was like, I don't want to go back to radio. I retired from radio. And the only other thing I ever enjoyed doing other than radio was when I was a photographer in high school and when I had a darkroom when I was a kid. And so I started being a photographer at that point, and here we are today.
No looking back, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
You were nearly a millionaire, buddy. That close.
I was very close. If we'd had a couple more years before the fall, then I would have become a millionaire. Yeah.
Oh, no.
And then we lost everything. And, had to leave our house, had to, the typical sad story. But, it's the journey, right? I mean, look at where I am today. Look at my friends. Look at the people I know now that I wouldn't know if I was still some stay-at-home dad. And, so I don't regret it at all. That's not true. I absolutely regret it. I could just kiss off all of y'all if I could just have the money again.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's been all right.
Turn back time.
Yeah, it's worked out okay.
Yeah, I think that it's funny to think about right about the exact same time. I had gone back to school and I was working in a flooring warehouse when I took up photography, which is what my parents were kind of, they did. And so I never wanted to do it. But Julie and I, my wife, we had met and we've been dating a little while, about 6 months. And we started a photography business together, like on the side in like 2007. And so we both had full-time jobs and we were just really ramping up, feeling out the industry, learning our craft, and not really too worried about making a ton of money doing it. And the same week, we both got laid off of our jobs in the same week. And that was in 2008. And so we're like, looked at each other. I remember we're sitting in my Toyota Corolla looking at each other going like, okay, do we find jobs or do we run with this photography business? And we're stupid, so we decided to run with the photography business. And that was, it was 2008, so 13 years ago. And it was funny how many photographers must have come into the industry and then gone again because of that global financial meltdown from 2007 to 2012, and how many are still in the business that got in at that time.
Do you think a similar thing could happen again now with a lot of people having lost their jobs and potentially other businesses?
The economy's like Wile E. Coyote has run off the cliff and he's still suspended in midair and he hasn't looked down yet. Like things will get worse before they get better. There's no question, I think. I don't think the economic impact has been felt yet. Take, for example, the wedding and events industry, which is 40% of my income. That's not going to come back for a year after COVID is gone. Because what you have is a lot of large companies that put a lot of money into corporate events, into sponsorship, and they don't want to be the first one to come back and be a super spreader of COVID. You know what I mean? So, yes, people will be ready to do this stuff again. I think weddings will come back sooner, but the industry's not going. The industry that employs everyone here in Florida, pretty much, and the entire wedding industry, I don't think it'll be back to like it was before for a year or two. I think it's going to take a while. And so, there's going to be a lot of long-term economic stress that we have not even begun to feel yet. Like right now, we've been punched in the face and we have not yet hit the mat as far as I'm concerned. So we're going to get back up. It's going to be fine. The economy comes in fits and starts. It always goes up. It always goes down. But it's going to be worse before it's better, I think. Boo, you're smarter than me.
I agree. My calendar is completely empty for 2021. I don't have a single thing on it. I don't have a single wedding or bar mitzvah or any event. And events and weddings were probably 80% of my business, if not more. And once it comes back, it's not going to be like, okay, it's safe. Great. We have a bar mitzvah next weekend. No, it's going to be, we have a bar mitzvah a year from now. We have a wedding a year from now. I just booked a wedding I have a friend of mine contacted me for his wedding for 2022 for 13, 14 months from now. And that's going to be, and we're not yet at the point where people are willing to book the weddings. He's an outlier that he's booking the wedding. So wedding photographers and event photographers are more than anyone are really going to feel the brunt. I think that headshots and portraits are where you want to try and push and concentrate if you can to try and make up some of the lost ground, because you're going to have lost ground for a while.
You have to add new products. You have to diversify your studio, even if it's only temporarily, in order to make the gap. And that's what we've done. We've actually added video, and video has started to replace our event income. Like I've got 4 video jobs over the next month that we would have never ventured into it. And the odd thing is you guys started your podcast because of the pandemic, I started my YouTube channel in the pandemic, and bumbling my way through learning how to do video, I actually have learned a lot and how to do video. And now I'm offering professional video services to my clients. And is it what I want to do? I don't know. I'm having fun with it right now. I don't know if I want it to be my long-term gig, but it is really helping. And so sometimes economic situations, there's natural disasters, there's market collapses, there's terrorist attacks, there's all kinds of things that can affect business. And if you're not prepared for that as a business, I mean, nobody saw this coming, but what people do see coming is that about every decade, at least once a decade, something happens that knocks all the chess pieces off the board that you have to be prepared for. And it was 9/11. It's hurricanes, it's earthquakes, it's fires, it's depressions, it's a mass shooting. Something is going to come every decade or so, and it's going to completely reset the game. And the people that can pivot and diversify are the ones who survive. And, like you said earlier, Nick, not everything that comes out of a tragedy or a downturn or a bad situation is bad. You might diversify into a business like headshots or portraits if you were a wedding shooter, and then you do that to survive. And then you realize, holy crap, I like this better. This is a better way of life. Or something similar. So, you can't control the change. It's coming. The only thing you can change is you. The bombshell theory is one of my favorites. It's used in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it says, I can change no one else by my direct action. I can only change myself. And if you remember that, and you use that in your life, you realize the only thing I can affect is me. So what do I have to do? You can stand there and look up at the sky. You can bitch at the government. You can complain about your neighbors. You can be mad at the fat slob who doesn't wear his mask to the grocery store. Whatever you got going on that's upsetting you, you can still only change yourself. And the sooner you realize that you are the only thing you have control over, the sooner you can be successful.
Do you offer therapy sessions by any chance?
No, my wife is my therapist. I just sit on the couch.
You're pretty much experiencing it right now.
This is it.
This is his therapy session.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's all I got on that. You guys want to talk about Marvel and Star Wars some more?
That'd be a therapy session for me, for sure.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. What we need is a distraction. I think, I've been. Yeah. Who hasn't been streaming, their comfort food to feel better right now? You know what I mean? It's we'll get back. We'll get back to it. It'll take time, and you do what you got to do. We're entrepreneurs. We're creative entrepreneurs. We're hustlers, baby. We're gonna make it. We're gonna do it. You just got to kind of like change it up for right now. Do some workshops. Get a side job at Costa. Whatever you got to do to make ends meet, because it'll get better again. Just be ready for when that happens.
I can agree with everything you guys have just said, and
you should. We're very smart.
Absolutely. What worries me about this country here is that we have a slightly different attitude, and it's not a good one towards lots of things, and we're a bit defiant, as in we know best, and what everyone else is wrong. It's all loaded.
Whoa! Ridiculous. Let me just stop you for a second. No one does. We know what's best better than Americans, my friend. Don't even try. Right. Don't even try to claim that you are arrogant, because we are the king of arrogance. We're like the only democracy in the world without universal health care, and we still think that we got the right idea.
And it hasn't worked for 200 and some years?
But you know what? But don't tell us that they do it better in England and Canada and Japan and Denmark and every place else in the world. No. I'm sure we're right, and everyone else is wrong. We're the kings of that.
I take it back. I absolutely take it back. You're definitely right.
We're the best at knowing better.
I worked for Amazon for 15 years, right? So I worked with Americans constantly, right? And you're right. You do know that.
I was working a gig once. It was a commercial gig convention. And part of my job was I had to go to like the third tee of a golf course and take pictures of the people hitting golf balls, because this was part of the weekend getaway, and they wanted pictures of this. I'm like, okay. So I'm standing there taking pictures, and the guy who was running the whole thing, who was their marketing guy that was running the whole thing for them, he's standing there. So we're talking over the course of about 2 hours that I'm standing on this golf course. And finally he just goes, he was Canadian. And finally he just goes, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question about America? And I was like, sure. I mean, you can ask me whatever you want. And you could tell he was nervous. He goes, what is it with you guys and guns? I was just like, I can't.
Have you ever shot one? It's kind of awesome.
I was just like, but I felt bad because his whole expression, he was just like, he just couldn't. He was like, I don't understand what it is with you guys and guns. And I was like, dude, I don't understand it either. So if you figure it out, let me know. But that's us. That's America.
So Booray, like for you, because you're under normal circumstances, or like say pre-COVID, your main the main part of your business was weddings and bar mitzvahs and events.
Yeah, well, I was weddings in the beginning, and then I picked up bar mitzvahs. And bar mitzvahs, I would say probably in the year or two before COVID, bar mitzvahs were starting to surpass weddings as my principal. But my wife and I had a wedding company. This is always a great tip. If you're trying to get in and find ways to get into a certain industry, if you can actually become a part of that industry, it makes it much easier. It's much easier to get in with the planner if the planner is married to you. So what we did was we started a beach wedding company for all the people who come to tourists who come down and want to get married on the beach in Florida, right? So we started the beach wedding company where my wife would provide, the poles and the arches and the chairs and the officiant and all of that stuff. And I would provide the photography. So that was like, could be up to 100 weddings a year that I was doing that. These were all mostly, for the most part, very quick weddings, like literally an hour on the beach. It's an hour shoot, the whole thing. And then that got me a lot of weddings and a lot of wedding experience. And then over the course of doing bar mitzvahs for years, I got word of mouth started to build up, and Facebook posts and people like that started to build up. And I became, there were certain temples that were just like, I was the most recommended photographer at that temple. So I was doing a lot of bar mitzvahs. And if you have a Jewish community where you live and you're not shooting bar mitzvahs, you are really missing out on a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, because no one ever comes in to pick up their wedding album and says, this is great. I'm going to get married twice more in the next 3 years. And I'd like to also go ahead and book you for that. which is what happens with bar mitzvahs. They come in and like, this is great. And now my middle kid is having a bar mitzvah a year from now. And here's the date, put it in your calendar. And you're like, thanks, I'll send you a contract. It's the easiest book you'll ever get. And you make just as much money, if not more, off the bar mitzvah than you do off the wedding, because they've been planning for this party for 13 years. They're not just starting out and trying to buy a home. Mom's a doctor, dad's a lawyer. They've got all of their business contacts are there. They've got to put on a good show. That people are flying in from all over the country. They rent the nicest country club. They're prepared to pay for everything. They want an album. They want a photo booth. They want a session with the kid and a photo guest book. They want all that stuff. And when you do it for the first kid, you're like, great, that was a nice package. And I made a good coin on that. And I'm also going to get the same exact deal on the other two kids, because you can't do it for one kid and not do it on the next kid. So if they got the big album, the next kid's going to get the big album. So it's fantastic. And then the sister comes with her kids. And yeah, so I love bar mitzvahs. I would absolutely give up weddings completely and just do bar mitzvahs if I could. And so then, along with that, everything else, headshots, portraits and stuff like that. And then now I find myself doing more and more headshots and some portraits. And of course, with COVID, I'm not doing any events at all.
How are you sort of reacting to the pandemic?
Mostly, it was the curl up in the fetal position and cry reaction that most people had. I, unlike Gary, did not attack it with a force of vigor of I'm going to redo my business and I was just like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to watch Netflix and eat. I'm just gonna, it's what happens. We have multiple streams of income. We own two other businesses. My wife owns a business. And then I own a business, and we own a third business as well. So we're okay if my business drops off. And, me being older than Gary, and I had cancer, so I'm immune compromised. I had to be sure that I didn't get in a situation where I might, get COVID. So I just kind of let it drift away a little bit for the most part, and picked up what business I could, did a few events here and there, did a wedding and everything like that. But mostly I'm just waiting. I'm at the starting blocks waiting for them to fire their gun, and then I'm off to the races again. I'm also been doing more teaching, making more videos for my YouTube channel. I've got to put together a new program for Imaging USA next year. If I get in there, I've got to put together some videos to sell. I became a Fuji guy a few months ago, and the Fuji community has embraced me warmly, which has been wonderful. There's nothing better than after all these years and all this shooting, to be excited about a camera again. to be treating it like, oh, new camera. I've shot Canon for 12 or 13 years. My whole career, I shot Canon, and I switched to Fuji about 2 months ago and redid my entire kit. I mean, I rebuilt everything, even my case, everything in my kit, with the exception of the 2 off-camera lights. Everything in my case is new. And that was exciting. I was like, okay, I'll take this time in the pandemic to rebuild myself and to try for something new and go in a different direction. I used to carry a ton of bulk and a ton of weight with me, and now I'm all about getting it as small as I can. That's my camera case on the table behind me, and that's been very fun and has kept me invigorated. You gotta find the joy where you can.
Now you're a couple of months into switching to Fuji. Still happy with the decision?
I am. But it's getting used to the controls. It's the muscle memory that's the hardest thing. I was shooting some candids the other day, and I got home, and a lot of them were out of focus, mostly hand movement. And I'm like, what? And I look, and I realize that when like with a Canon, if you're going to be shooting natural light candids like that, you just go, oh, great, slap it in AV mode, aperture priority. And then you've got your presets already done on ISO or whatever. I would probably set my ISO manually and let my shutter speed go to auto, and then shoot. I've done that a million times. Now with Fuji, every control has to be set differently because it's got all those controls. So you set shutter speed to A, you set ISO to A, and then you set your aperture where you want it as you're shooting. And when I set my ISO to A, because I didn't check it with my glasses, I didn't make it to A. And instead, my ISO is at like 320. So my shutter speed to compensate was shooting at about 20th of a second. So as long as no one was moving, I was fine. But if there was movement, there was a little blur. And I was like, okay, well, lesson learned, pay more attention to your controls. Don't get complacent. You've got to go back to shooting like you just started while you learn and become, muscle memoried into this camera. And also, I don't know about you, but I don't pay a lot of attention to what's on the screen when I'm shooting. Like when you're shooting, I like, okay, what's my shutter speed? What's my ISO? What's my white balance? What's my, are you looking at all the stuff that's around? I mean, after a while, don't you just kind of block that out?
Do it instinctively, right? And it feels about right. Yeah.
Well, right. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just blocking it out because how did I not notice that I was at a 20th of a second? Even when I review the images real quick, why didn't I look at the numbers? And it's hubris. It's because I've been doing it so long, I just don't think I need to look at the numbers. The first time you started shooting, you looked at the numbers constantly to make sure they were right.
I've just switched to Canon myself. Literally this week, I've just moved to Canon.
From?
Panasonic Lumix, GH5S, because I was doing primarily video.
All right.
And I had Nikon for stills. So I've thought, I've had enough of that. I'm going to consolidate. I'm going to go to one brand. I've gone for the R6 as a stills and the C70 for film, and they're both RF mounts, and now I can use the same lenses across 1 and 2. The menu systems are very similar and same kind of idea. But now I'm looking. I am paying attention to what's on those screens because I don't know these cameras that well yet.
Yeah. It's really disconcerting when you pick up a foreign camera. I was at a wedding one time and I used the Canon 5D Mark III, and I was a guest at a wedding, and it was a photographer getting married and another photographer was shooting his wedding. And the other photographer was like, Booray, do me a favor and just shoot the first dance for me here. And he handed me his Canon D6 with a flash. And I was like, because it wasn't exactly like my camera. And I was like, oh, and I botched it. I mean, they were not, I was like ashamed of the pictures because they were not as good as they would have been if I had had my camera in my hand. And you just don't realize how because he didn't have his button set up exactly where I had my button set up. And he didn't have his, oh my gosh. You really got to just work with it. I used to tell people in my classes that when I first started with my Canon, I used to just sit on the couch with my camera in my hand while I was watching TV. And I would just go, change the aperture, and change the shutter speed. And I would do all of that with my fingers without looking at my camera because I needed to teach myself to be able to do it in the dark.
God, that was my Wednesday night.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. I was doing pretty much the same thing. Oh, that's so funny.
You got to teach yourself, where is everything and how do I do it? And even though I had set this camera up the way I wanted to set up, still when I was on the job, the eye tracking wasn't grabbing on the headshots. And I was like, okay, where did I put the eye tracking on off button? Which button did I program to eye tracking? I have to find it real quick and turn it off and turn it on again and and then how come it's not eye tracking? Oh, because I probably have the box set too small. If I set full wide frame, it will catch the eye and track for me. So I had to do that. And this is learning stuff. It's been so long since I've had to learn anything with a Canon.
I have this love-hate relationship with Nikon. I've shot Nikon for so long that I know it in the dark. I know the menu systems, I know the button layouts, and I'm just so familiar with it. But maybe, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I bought an X100F, and I bought it because I wanted, I wanted to simplify. I wanted to have a little camera that I could take around with me, because I realized that whenever we went out anywhere, that wasn't the job. That's the one.
This is just for if anyone's watching this video, so you know what camera he's talking about.
Exactly. So, incidentally, I think you have the same case as me. Hang on a minute.
Yeah, this is the V, and I had the F, and before the F, I had the S. And this is why I switched to Fuji right here. Yeah, this is why I switched to Fuji, is because of this camera.
That's the one. Well, I mean, for me, the fact that it had like a fixed focal length was immediately attractive, because I kind of figured, this is like, it's cutting it so back down to basics that it could be an interesting way of making photography interesting again.
Yes.
And plus,
yes, and that's important.
Yeah,
it really is. You've got to rejuvenate yourself.
Exactly. And so, for me at the time was I found that, we used to go out, let's say as a family, and I would take, DSLR and X amount of lenses and whatever. But as an end result, you don't end up shooting really, or you don't take the camera out as often, because you're constantly having to go through the kerfuffle of putting a lens on and getting it out and all that. So I was looking for something that was like smaller, just smaller, simpler, and more efficient in a way. And I really fell in love with that camera, and it's
you found yourself enjoying it more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, your story is exactly the same as my story. I did the same thing. I looked at it, and it also looks like the XT30, and I got one from Fuji and tried it out, and it's small and nice and really good. You put the lenses on it, but I ultimately was like, if I get a camera with interchangeable lenses, then I'm going to want to carry a bunch of lenses. And if I carry a bunch of lenses, I'm not going to want to take it out of the bag, or I'm not going to want to take it with me to this or take it with me to that. Exactly. I need to I need to actually limit myself so that I don't screw up myself. I need to force myself into being simpler. And that was why I bought that camera. And then eventually I fell in love with the entire Fuji system because of that camera. That's like a gateway drug, the Fuji
100%.
system.
And funnily enough, I did a couple of videos for different purposes the other day, and I kind of thought, I wonder what would happen if I didn't shoot everything on the Nikon that I normally shoot all this on, but what would happen if I just used my little Fuji and shot on that? And I have to tell you, the colors that come out of that camera on video, and of course it's not it's not the most practical video camera and all the rest of it, but actually straight out of camera, the files just looked great.
Oh, you're using the X100F for video?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and I was really surprised.
No.
Yeah,
with no
really
image
surprised.
stabilization. Wow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was on a tripod, so it was it was like talking cat kind of stuff. But man, those files looked so good, and I'm sort of torn, and I'm kind of thinking, man, my Nikon's aging. I'm getting to the point where I either replace the body, or I look at kind of doing what Nick has done and changing completely. And as much as I think from a practicality point of view, since Nick and me work together a lot, it would make sense for me to switch to Canon also, because then we could
sure
swap gear and whatnot. But I am so drawn to let's say the XT4 is the one that I'm looking at the moment. It's just like, I don't know, but as my wife keeps reminding me, there are other bills to pay for first.
Yes. Well, listen, I've already made several videos about this for my YouTube channel and why I switched to Fuji and why I wouldn't, I thought about doing it when the XT3 was out and I didn't because of the ergonomics. Fuji doesn't have good ergonomics. It's not a camera that's comfortable in your hand for 7 hours. And so I didn't switch. Then when the XT4 came out and had IBIS and other things that they had fixed that I really liked. And then on top of that, I was at the point where I just felt I got to make the jump. I'm using the Mark III. They're already up. They're at the Mark IV, the Mark V, and now they've got the R5 and the R6. I've got to make the jump. My camera now has become ancient. I used to have the cutting edge camera, and now it's become ancient. I've got to make the jump, and I've got to go to mirrorless. And then price became a big factor too, because once I started looking at the pricing, it was like, I could just get, I think I built my whole kit out for about $5,000. That's my whole kit. That's everything: camera, backup camera, lenses, flashes, off-camera lights, batteries, everything. And one of the most expensive rolling cases the Think Tank makes, because thank God someone finally made a case with 4 wheels on the bottom. I've been begging for this for 10 years. I tried to make one myself. I'm like, will someone please make a rolling case with 4 wheels on the bottom? Because I don't care if it fits in the overhead. I'm so sick of every camera manufacturer making a bag. Look, it fits in the overhead and you can wear it as a backpack when you're hiking the Teton Mountains. I'm like, no, I'm going down to the BFW hall to shoot a wedding reception. I just need something that's easy to get up the steps and navigate through the hotel elevator. I don't need back straps and all this other stuff. I need something that's convenient to a gig shooter. And no one makes a bag for us. No one makes a bag for gig shooters, people who aren't flying with their bag or hiking with their bag.
Yeah.
And I've got designs and I've talked to people. I want to make my own bag, and it's too expensive. I need to kickstart it.
Yeah.
But Think Tank finally came out one that's got 4 wheels. Oh, it's a dream. You just go rolling into anything and just rolling it beside you. It's so easy to go. Oh, it's fantastic. But that bag is smaller than the big Pelican case I used to carry. So if you want to have that bag, Booray, you've got to have smaller stuff in it.
You know, they also just recently brought out a duffel bag.
A duffel bag?
Yeah, so Think Tank are now making a duffel bag.
Yeah, I saw that the other day. They're like, Think Tank duffel bag. I'm like, it's a duffel bag. It's a big open sack with a pocket on the side.
Exactly.
I mean, I love Think Tank. Both my bags are Think Tank bags, and I think they do genius stuff. But the duffel bag thing is one of those clearly, why don't you just make a t-shirt? You know, it's a duffel bag. There's nothing more simple in the world than a duffel bag. There's no new technology in the duffle bag industry.
It's probably
we need to be taking advantage of.
It's probably also one of the most expensive duffel bags you can get on the market.
Probably,
right now.
yeah.
And still strangely addictive.
You're paying just to have the little Think Tank logo on there.
Oh, yeah, and it's green.
Well, of course, it's a duffel bag.
Oh, yeah. So switching camera systems that's a tough thing. I still haven't really been able to make up my mind as to what I'm going to do. Maybe later on this year. I think I might just
about making the jump to a new camera system.
Yeah. I mean, it's as always, if money was no object,
right.
I would use.
Oh, I have an R5.
Oh yeah. I'd have a Hasselblad.
Right.
Whatever.
I'd have Gary's camera. If I was rich like Gary, I would have Gary's camera. I'd have an R5. I absolutely would have stayed with Canon if money was no object. The main reason I went to Fuji, not the main. There were 3 or 4 reasons, but money was a big part of it because Canon cameras just keep getting more expensive, and Fuji cameras don't, and Fuji lenses don't. And also, I think we reached a point in the progression of sensors, as it always does happen, that it used to be that if you were a serious photographer, you shot medium format. And you would poo-poo somebody who was shooting full frame. Like if you were shooting in a studio with film, in a studio, you had your Hasselblad, you had your, your whatever, you had your medium format. That's what you were shooting with. And full frame was only if you were going on location, and maybe not even then. That was for not the really serious photographers, because it just wasn't as good as medium format. And then full frame got really good. And so when our generation came along, full frame was our top. It was, full frame. I shoot full frame. Oh, what do you shoot? Oh, I have a crop sensor. Okay. Yeah. Crop sensor. All right. Well, I shoot full frame. I shoot full frame. And meanwhile, Nick's over here going, you mean with the micro four thirds lumens?
Yeah.
We don't even let you in the conversation. Yeah. You're not even allowed in the room. You are barred from the club. Yes, just get out. You're not even allowed in the room, right? So you're like, full frame. I'm full frame. Of course I'm full frame. I'm a pro. Of course I'm full frame. And I think we're reaching that point now, and the full frame people don't want to admit it, but we're reaching that point now where crop sensor is the new full frame, which was the new medium format. That crop sensor has reached the point where it is good enough. I'm shooting headshots all day 2 days ago with my Fuji, and I'm at f2.8 and 100 at 230 millimeters, and I've got a beautiful blurry bokeh in the background, and everything is beautiful, and the color is great, and the files are big, and I'm sorry, it's indistinguishable. I know people say, oh, well, if you get in there real close and you zoom it up full size and get a magnifying glass, you might notice that. Nobody cares about that. Okay, it's fun. It's fun for us to talk about that, but nobody cares about that. We're talking about a public that thinks a great photo is something that was shot on a cell phone, where literally the lens is so small, it's like the size of a pill, and they think that's great. So the fact that my sensor is this big instead of this big is not going to make a difference in their world. And it's not going to make a difference in my world. And you certainly know that, Nick, because you're shooting micro four thirds when you were shooting with Panasonic.
Yeah. I mean, that sensor was great on it, you know? Its stills weren't great at all, but its video was fantastic.
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. You know, but you're right, sensors have got they're so far ahead now that, you know,
there was a time when Ansel Adams was shooting on an 8x10 plate, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just everything's going to get smaller over time, but people always resist change. Yeah. And I'm not saying that, listen, again, if I wanted to spend $10,000 to rebuild my kit, I'd have an R5 right now.
Yeah.
I would have gone with an R5. There's things I like better about Fuji, but I'm a Canon shooter. I love their work. They're fantastic. I don't fault them. And I absolutely would get full frame if I could afford full frame. If I could afford medium format, I'd go to medium format. You know, I would, but do I have to? That's the question. Because as a businessman, ultimately you have to make the decision based on what's best for your business and best for your bottom line. And for me, I was just like, is full frame going to enable me to do anything that I can't do with the crop sensor? And the answer was no. Yeah. There was a time when it did. When the 5Ds came out, the Mark IIIs and the Mark IIs, the low light performance on those cameras was noticeably different and noticeably better than anything else out there. Because I had a crop sensor and I went to full frame, and working in a dark reception at 3600 ISO, that was huge difference. I didn't have to use anti-noise software anymore on my photos. I didn't have to do any of that stuff because it was so much better, and that was worth it. And I got 10 years out of value on that. Yeah. But now, nah.
Yeah, I mean, I find exactly the same thing. I some years ago, I started when I first started in like professional photography. I started shooting concerts, and so there was a point where I needed to find a camera body that could really deal with low light performance. And so at the time, the D750 had just come out, and that was, as far as like low light performance was concerned, that was sort of the bells and whistles, and it worked fantastically well in that kind of situation. But of course, back then there wasn't really very much around in the way of competition. But of course now, 6-7 years later or something, you look around and there's a plethora of camera bodies that can really achieve the same thing.
Gary and I say this all the time. You can't buy a bad camera anymore.
No, exactly.
No, you really can't. It doesn't matter. Say, what's the best camera? Whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we truly have reached the point that everyone is always saying, it's not the camera, it's the photographer. It's never been more true than now. Because if you buy, my backup camera, I bought used for $800. And I absolutely could shoot an event with that, and it would look every bit as good as the camera that I was using 10 years ago that I paid $3,000 for.
Yeah. And it's not like those photos from 10 years ago were bad, right?
No. And that's the other thing. People were perfectly fine with the way my pictures looked 10 years ago. Yeah. And so, you have to be careful that you don't get too much. It's fun to do it because it's fun to do it. It's fun to be like, oh, let me, in the perfect camera, and look at this and look at the difference in these specs. And we do it every week on the podcast. It's fun to do all that, but it stops at your wallet. And that's when, as a business person, that's when you get like, I would love to have a freestanding, Gary has a freestanding studio. I don't. I have a home studio. I would love to have a freestanding space like Gary has. But then when I look at the numbers, I'm like, I don't do enough business to justify a freestanding space. And if I got a freestanding space, I would have to totally adjust my business model in order to support that freestanding space.
Yeah.
So don't do it, because I would feel like more of a professional photographer if I had an actual studio.
Yeah. And
I know so many people who do that, and I'm like, you're sinking yourself.
Yeah.
I completely agree. In a previous life, I used to run a contemporary music school. And so, that originally goes back almost like 20 years or something. But, originally, like many musicians, you start teaching and so on, and then you get to the point where your timetable's pretty full. You can't take on any more students. So you do the usual thing. You increase your prices, you lose some students, you get some more space, you book some more. But there's, you reach that point where you go like, okay, if I can't take on any more students, I might as well hire somebody else who can teach for me. And then you very quickly arrive at the idea of setting up a school, which is exactly what I did. And then, of course, you're very quickly at the point where you go like, okay, so now I need classrooms. Now I need a building. And, I need to actually have, brick and mortar attached to the business. And that's exactly what I did. And I had a school and, 2 buildings actually for almost like a little over 2 decades. Well, a little over 12 years, I think, something like that. And what that really does is it's like it puts a chain around your neck.
Yes, it puts a huge chain around
very quickly, because you very quickly realize that, whilst previously, I don't know, this probably would take, previously kind of go like, if I made like 40 grand a year or something, I'd be all right, I can survive. So now you're at 140.
Right.
And then you have staff, so you got to pay their salaries. So now you're at 200. And before you know it, your minimum amount of money that you need to make to actually keep your head over water has hugely increased, and that puts so much more pressure on you. And then as an end result, there are times when you end up, or at least I felt, I'm just working to keep that building running.
Yes. Yes. You're just feeding the monkey.
Yeah, feeding the monkey.
And,
exactly.
And one of the reasons I survived in the last year is that my expenses were so low. I mean, in the middle, I bought a whole new camera setup in the middle of a pandemic when I hadn't worked in 4 months.
Yeah.
So I had the money for that. And that money came out of my business account.
Yeah.
Because my expenses were so low, and they got even lower once COVID hit. Yeah, business dropped off, but my expenses completely dropped off. I mean, I was putting gas in my car once every 6 weeks.
Yeah. Same.
Right. And I had no other expenses. And I was pleasantly surprised to discover I pay myself a salary, of course, and I've paid myself a salary this entire time, and I've never had to dip into savings, and it's because I have no overhead.
Yeah.
And so, I was really pleasantly surprised to discover with COVID how easy it is for us to live the same life we've always lived with a whole lot less money. Just by, oh, guess what? We're not going to eat out 5 nights a week anymore.
Yeah.
We couldn't eat out, right? So we started eating at home. And I told my wife, I'm like, I think we're saving $1,000 a month just because we've been eating at home.
Yeah. We, and of course, like many families, we made similar changes, because we at some point, it's quite early on, we realized that, because I didn't I work from home for the most part, and my wife is a teacher, but she teaches in a school literally across the road. So her commute is 30 seconds on foot. And so there was a point where we thought, like, why are we paying for 2 cars? We don't need 2 cars.
Yeah, we started thinking that. With my wife, I started thinking about that. She was like, oh, now our daughter learned to drive. And she was like, oh, she's got my car all the time, and she goes to school all the time. I'm like, where do you go? We work from home. We don't ever go anywhere. As long as there's a car in the driveway, either one of us can go to the grocery store or whatever we need.
That's right.
What's the problem? She's like, we got to get her a car. I'm like, why? She's the only one that ever leaves the house, and we have 2 cars.
Yeah.
She could just take one of ours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. I mean, we actually sold both of our cars, and we bought a hybrid car instead. So now we have one car, which in running, I mean, paying for it is a little bit more expensive because it is a hybrid, but actually you save gas, on top of it, so it kind of it pays for itself. So in a weird way, we now have one car that's bigger, and actually we're paying less for it, and it's a lot more economical, and we're fine. As a family, I have 3 kids, or we have 3 kids. We're actually totally fine. We haven't missed, not having 2 cars. So we've kind of gone, from being a 2-car family to a 1-car family as a total result of this pandemic. Because I don't think we would have, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, it's one of these things. If it hadn't been for the pandemic, I don't think we would have even thought about it.
Right. No, you wouldn't have. You don't ever think about cutting back until you're forced to cut back. And then when you're forced to cut back, you find, geez, there's all these ways I can cut back.
Exactly.
And then you start to regret, because then you think, oh, if I had done this 15 or 20 years ago, I'd have an extra $100,000 sitting in my bank account right now.
Exactly.
I'd be able to retire early if I had just been more frugal in my life.
Exactly.
You think about, oh my gosh, the money I spent. You think about my parents, they were frugal, and we had 1 car until, gosh, I was 10. We had 1 car. My dad took the car to work, and my mom was trapped at home.
Yeah.
They were frugal. We never ate out. Go to McDonald's. What is it, your birthday? Yeah. We didn't eat out. There was none of that stuff that was going on. And then my parents were able to retire quite comfortably and have a great retirement and everything else, because they were frugal. But I remember once I was thinking about taking another job, and I couldn't decide if I wanted to take it. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to like that job or not. I said, but it's more money. And she said, yeah, but don't you think if you make more money, you're going to find a way to spend it?
Yep.
And I was like, well, of course I am. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then years later, looking back on it, I realized exactly how right she was. Yeah. That making more money is not the answer to your problem. You're going to find a way to spend it. You know, you have a Netflix subscription and then you make more money and suddenly you have a Disney Plus subscription and a CBS All Access subscription and a Prime subscription. You find a way to spend the money.
That was a super interesting conversation that we had in last week's episode where we interviewed Donna Did It, who's a Canadian YouTuber hailing from the really rather freezing city of Edmonton, Alberta. And so he started out his YouTube career, just doing vlogs, essentially. And what he was saying was like, for the first couple of years, nothing really happened on his channel because nobody really searches for what Donna does on a Wednesday afternoon. When he started reviewing gear and when he started talking about this lens and that new body, whatever, that's when things started to turn around for him very dramatically.
And the crazy part is you don't even have to have the gear. You could be like, my first reaction to this announcement. And right at that time, everybody is looking for more information on that particular piece of gear. And so you'll get so much more play on a video like that than something that you took ages to shoot and conceive and produce. And so, my favorite videos have like 500 views and my stupid one is like, I just point a camera at myself when I talk about my R5 and it's got like 30,000 views. You know what I mean? It's like, what do they call that? It's basically your return on investment. Like how much effort are you putting in versus how many views are you getting? And honestly, for me, my favorite stuff to watch is like Casey Neistat, who does these really compelling vlogs, but like they're really clever and the shots are all really clever and he kind of goes around that thing that he's doing that day and it's not necessarily about anything in particular. And I just love it and find that stuff fascinating. But like that's a lot of effort to produce. And I think that I see what you see with YouTubers is like if you look back at guys like Peter McKinnon and Matty Hapoya and people who are content creators with 1 million+ followers, if you go back to their early stuff, it was a lot of tutorials sitting at their desks, really. And then once their channel was making money to the point where it was worth putting in that effort, now they do. And they make videos about whatever it doesn't even matter what their video is. It's interesting to watch because the production value is so good and you like their personality. And so you see that shift. And I think that's a pretty natural progression. So if Booray's channel is like, he gets 100,000 subscribers and he's making...
Yeah. When that happens, I'm going to have an editor and I'm going to have,
Exactly. When you can make $50,000 on a YouTube channel, and let me tell you, I've done the math based on putting out one video a week that's consistently liked as much as your videos. If you're putting out similarly liked content, that's the channel average of what a YouTuber should be doing. With 100,000 followers, you can make $50,000-$60,000 a year in just YouTube ad revenue. Gross. Yeah.
Right. Because if you want to see a good video, Jared Polin just did a video called How Much Money I Make on YouTube.
Oh, I saw that.
Where he breaks down all the money. And he's like, we just had the best year ever last year. But still, when it's all said and done, I make about $50,000 with the best year we've ever had. He said, because you're thinking, wow, you're making 6 figures on YouTube. He's like, yeah, but I also have a studio and I have 2 full-time guys who are doing the editing and the shooting for me. And I have all of this stuff that I have to pay for and taxes. So when it's all said and done, I don't really make that much money off YouTube.
Right. Well, that's the thing is that when you have that audience, you open up other ways to monetize the channel.
That's what he said.
Sure. I have an online class called Kickstart Your Headshot Business that I've been selling since 2018. I did a video that's got 1,000 views on it. And I mentioned my class and gave a discount code with the word YouTube at the beginning of it. And I mentioned it offhand at the opening to this video. And I sold, I made like $1,000 selling that class just off of a video with 1,000 views. So like what you can stand to make when you have a larger audience, like your main revenue is not going to be from YouTube. I mean, that's why all the YouTubers are like, this video is brought to you by Squarespace or Skillshare or whatever the heck, because that's honestly where the real money is going to come in.
I think there's a danger there though, because with, you mentioned Peter McKinnon's channel. It's one of the things where, and I think this also is like a natural progression where, of course, as like, you get into a channel because you like the content. And then of course, when that changes to the point where you think like, I'm not sure whether I've just been watching a commercial for a Ford, right? Or whatever that was, that's then you as an audience probably naturally move on to other channels. But of course, Peter McKinnon at that point generates a new audience that are into the kind of stuff that, he'll take some with him and he'll gain.
I'm sure that there's audience turnover, but at the same time, once, it depends on the type of channel you have. Like if the channel is based on the personality of the host, honestly, if people like you, they'll watch you do anything. Booray and I were just discussing this the other day. It's like when you teach a workshop or you teach a class or a platform class at WPPI or Imaging USA, you don't have to give as much actionable take-home information as you think you do. Like you want to pack it full of stuff, but one, you're going to overload people's brains, and two, if you're funny and engaging and interesting and authentic, people will sit there for 2 hours and listen to you and take home 2 or 3 useful things and be happier than if they got a very dry program that was full of incredible actionable information that they filled up 10 pages of notes. And so I think a lot of that ends up being, if it's the type of YouTube personality that trades on a particular person's personality, and if that's your person and you're tuned into them, I pretty much watch whatever they do. And especially if you are a content creator or aspire to be one, the production value has a lot of education in it to see how they're making the things that they're making. But the irony of becoming a big YouTuber is that a lot of it just becomes self-referential, like a snake eating its own tail. It's like a lot of their videos are about how they make videos.
Yeah.
It's not like, hey, learn this in Photoshop or check out this camera or this is how I made this image. It's like, here's my YouTube lighting setup,
See, that was really interesting when we were talking to Donna last week, that there was 2 specific things. One was actually, as you get as a bigger channel, you become more of an entertainer than anything else. But the second thing, which was really interesting that he said, is that he's always shot APS-C and he moved to full frame and he started doing videos more on full frame related gear. And he started losing subscribers. His views went down, all of that kind of stuff. So going back to what we were talking about with Booray earlier, that, why not stick with APS-C? They're just, the sensors are just as good these days. And so he's actually switched back to doing a lot more stuff about APS-C related gear. And now his views and subscribers have gone back up.
If you look at my channel, my views for anything where I talk about the Fuji X100 series are greater than any video I ever make about general concept or general theory or how to shoot or the X-T4 or anything, because people love this camera. That's another thing. You can be one of those guys who just tries to have content that covers a broad spectrum. And that's great. Like in my photography business, that's what I do. I cover a broad spectrum, but you're also going to be well served if you can find a niche and just become the people's go-to guy in that niche. So anytime I make a video that isn't specifically about the X100V or the 100F, I know that I'm not going to get near the attention to it that I get if I make a video about that camera.
Yeah, if you stop making X100V videos, you would lose subscribers, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you've got to make, you got to find it, but for me, and all this is well and good, but for me, the underlying reason and driving force behind everything is it just has to be fun to do. Because, I didn't start my YouTube channel because I was hoping to make money on it. I didn't start my podcast because I was hoping to make money on it. I did it because this will be fun to do. The minute it starts to not be fun, I'm not going to do it anymore. So if it's not fun to spend all day setting up camera equipment to shoot my video, then if I keep doing that thing that's not fun, eventually I just won't make videos.
But if it gets big enough to where you could pay someone else to do the not fun bits,
I can pay someone else to do that for me. That's great.
Exactly. When we realized that podcasting is actually a lot more fun than we initially thought it might be, and I think we realized that, we're going to carry this on even when the pandemic is long gone. What really started to come into that is, when we started having guests on the show, that really became extremely fun for us for a number of reasons. One was that it's just fun generally talking to other photographers, just generally. But, when you're at a point where you speak to people and you learn something from every conversation that you have, and, this might be, you might talk to, I don't know, we talked to Aaron Nace not too long ago. We learned a lot. I learned a lot about business-related issues, not necessarily about Photoshop, but about the way that he reacted to the pandemic, the way he changed his business around and stuff like that. So that's really when, there's an immediate take home for both Nick and I think, which really drives us on to make more of these episodes, because not only, are we hoping to create content that's really useful to our listeners, obviously, but it's really just simply very useful for ourselves, because, we're having a great time doing it. Of course, we get to play around with cameras and do all that kind of stuff and talk about photography, but we actually, we're learning something in the process.
Well, there's other sides too. I mean, there's so many benefits to doing something like a podcast or doing a YouTube channel. One, of course, is you get to learn a lot of stuff. Two, you get to meet a lot of people who you wouldn't otherwise. It's an introduction, right? Sure. You're just sending me an email out of the blue. Hey, would you like to be on my podcast? Now, if you didn't have a podcast, you never would have emailed me or known me or whatever. And now we're friends, right? Correct. I come to London, I'll be like, hey, I'm going to be in England, and let's get together and have whatever it is you guys, crumpets,
tea and crumpets. I think is the national
I guess something.
Dish.
I don't know. Let's go. I don't know. Let's go colonize another.
Oh man, for
country.
sure, 100%.
Whatever it is you guys do for fun. And
no, actually, the British national pastime is queuing. So if you want to go wait in a line together,
yeah, let's queue.
Which is really devastating because nobody can queue now because of the pandemic. There's no queuing. The British are just despondent without queuing.
I would just be happy if you would discover ice. Just discover ice.
Put ice in your
Can
drinks.
I just get some ice in my friggin' drink?
That's right.
Anyway, so there's that. But then the other really weird thing that you guys might experience, that Gary and I absolutely experienced, I think, was that you're just like sitting around, you're like, hey, let's put on a show in the barn. And so you start calling people up who are like, oh, can we call that guy? That guy's kind of, I'm asking to be in the podcast. And like, okay. And so you have that guy. A perfect example of this would be Jerry Jonas. Do you guys know who Jerry Jonas is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Jerry Jonas is about as rock star as you can get in the photography world when it comes to weddings. So we got on the phone with Jerry in Australia to have him talk about WPPI and their image competition, because Jerry was running it one year. So we get him and his wife on the phone and we talk about image competition. Well, no, it was just him, I think. Or maybe it was his wife.
It was both of them. It was Jerry and Melissa.
It was both of them. Jerry and who?
Melissa.
Thank you, Jerry and Melissa. We have them on the phone and we do the thing. Then, we keep doing the podcast, and I'm doing the things that I'm doing for PPA and doing those live things and all that kind of stuff, right? The teaching and everything. Our paths never cross again. 5 years later, I'm in Las Vegas at WPPI, and I get invited to Jerry Jonas's house. And I'm like, oh, okay. I guess, because I know somebody who knows him or whatever. I get there. His wife comes up to me and goes, Booray Perry, I've been wanting to meet you in person for so long. And I'm like, how do you even know who I am? How do you even know I exist? You're Jerry Jonas's wife. Yeah. Whatever. And it's because of this stupid little podcast.
I would argue that Jerry Jonas is Melissa Jonas's husband.
There you go. But you see, my point is that doing stuff like this will open up your world very wide to so many different people who will then take you in and become friends with you, who you might never have met before. I mean, even now you guys get to say that you're friends with us. And in normal circumstances, we would never even talk to you.
Never.
We would just be like, those guys with the thing and the nesting doll lenses behind him, like some sort of artwork. I'm not having anything to do with either one of those people. But now, because you had us on the podcast, we have to be nice to you. And 3 or 4 years from now, you could be huge, and we'd be like, hey, when are you going to have us on the podcast again?
See the power we wield.
You'd be like, could you have us on the podcast again? And you'd be like, we don't have time for you, Booray. Sorry.
That's right. I think it's like anything, it's the same really in the music industry. When you first started getting into the music industry, and you end up, working with people whose names you've actually heard before.
Right.
You have the same sort of reaction. But I think, we always dance the dance of joy when we get an email back saying like, yeah, okay, cool. Let's, when do you want to do the podcast? That's always great for us, really. Not only because it means, we can have another guest on the show, but also because it just means, we're going to have a really fun conversation, with somebody who, we might just know from, the internet or Right.
It's fascinating to me because I remember my very first big photography conference in 2007 or 2008, maybe. Went to Imaging USA in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's our biggest one, I think, that we have in the States. And I was new in the photography business, and my girlfriend, Julie, who is now my wife at the time, we were walking around and everything was a magic show. It was like, oh my God. And we go into a room, we would watch a speaker and be like, oh, they're so amazing. Oh man, we'll never be able to be that good. We'll never be able to be that successful. And we just left like buzzing with a mix of like defeated like will never be that famous. And also the excitement of all the possibility. And all of these photographers were like superheroes and rock stars, and like everybody's David Lee Roth and Freddie Mercury and Celine Dion, except they're not. You know, like and all these years later, 13 years later in the industry, and it's amazing to me that I was ever like that with people, that they're just photographers that are further on down the road. And most everybody I know in the industry is just a sweetheart.
Oh,
you know,
sure.
I mean, if you want to talk about the bell curve for good people, talk about Jerry and Melissa as a great example, but they would be like, you know, everybody knows them and loves them. Like if you don't know Jerry and Melissa and don't like them, if you've met them, spent any time with them and you don't like them, there is something legitimately wrong with you, I promise. But that being said, all these big names, you know, when I saw like Pete Wright, who works for Canon now, and he's an incredible wedding photographer from Virginia, and he was on stage, this big conference I was at. I was in the audience. I won one of his giveaways, and I was so geeked out. I had lunch with him yesterday at a barbecue restaurant in Sarasota. Like, he's a good friend now. And like, the point is like, we're all in this family together. And one of the things that I think about often is that we don't really have coworkers. And I think that we cling to each other a little harder because you guys are our coworkers.
So we have come to the end of Camera Shake Podcast, episode 44. It was an absolute blast. Gary Hughes and Booray Perry, thank you so much for being our guests on this show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Excellent. We will be back next week with episode 45. As per usual, every Thursday. Of course, if you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, make sure you head over to YouTube and check out not only our sultry voices, but you can see our beautiful faces in full Technicolor. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, do all the things that every YouTuber tells you every time you watch a video. Enough said. See you next week.